One of the beauties about being a game developer, especially an indie developer, is having the freedom to make whatever you want. And while that certainly allows us to see a huge assortment of creative and different games, it's not the same as making a popular or very market friendly game. And for today's video, I want to talk about this kind of discussion relating to games that may do everything right or within the developer's thoughts, but can every video game be marketable or quote unquote market friendly like that? And it's a very tough discussion to have. Because as we've said, the beauty about indie development is that anyone can make any game that they want. Do you want to make an hour and a half long tour of a retirement home? Do you want to make a game that's literally 5 hours of hardcore first-person shooting Kaizo platforming? You can do that. But the problem is that there's a very wide line between the game that you want to make and the game that's going to sell well. And that can be very tough for a lot of developers to kind of come to terms with. And it has led to a lot of games, again, struggling to find that balance between I want to make this, but at the same time I also want to eat and pay my bills each month. And the games that we're talking about today that definitely have these kinds of tricky conversations to them are what I like to call explicitly designed. And there's a little bit to unpack with that. Normally when we talk about games that don't do well, we can point to elements that kind of got messed up during the design process. Maybe the developer didn't play test this mechanic all that well, and it's not as great as it should be. Maybe the UI is hard to get into. Maybe there's a bug that causes your computer to crash, and so on and so forth. But typically when there's a problem with a game, poor reviews, harsh criticism, stuff like that you can point to elements that didn't come out right or didn't work. But when we talk about explicitly designed titles, these are games where the developer did exactly what they wanted. In terms of execution, this is like a 100 out of a 100. The exact vision that the developer had in mind has been translated perfectly to game. So what happens when you try to review those titles? And how well do they sell? Now, we'll be going to talking about a more famous example of this in the second part of this video, but the big one that kind of popped up that I've been playing lately that led to this is Return of the Obra Dinn. This is the latest game from game developer Lucas Pope, who is probably more famously known for Papers, Please. It's even hard to describe this game in any term here. You basically play a border patrol guard in a fictional country who has to make sure that the people have the proper passports in order to get through. And yes, I know for a lot of you watching this right now, your eyes just all glazed over with that description. But the game turned out to be a cult hit, leading to a lot of people playing it. I think it won several awards. And of course, it gave him the motivation to make the Return of the Obra Dinn, which the first look video is up here on the channel. I'll try and include a link to it somewhere if YouTube allows me. But the point is, with his games, they are 100% his vision. I can't imagine any part of Papers, Please or Return of the Obra Dinn of him saying that I didn't want this in this game, or I had to cut corners, or I had to rush through it. His games are so meticulously designed that you can't help but think that everything is there for a reason. And while that is perfectly executed, it again takes us back to the question for this video. Can every game be a market-friendly title? And I just don't see it like that. And like I said, this is a very tricky conversation to be had, because I know some of you will probably point to games like Five Nights at Freddy's, Minecraft, and a lot of indie games that just kind of one day appeared and took over, especially with Five Nights and Minecraft. And as we've said many times over, you never know when a game is going to become that mass market hit, that indie darling, that Game of the Year award winner, and so on and so forth. And another big point about this is that critical reception is not the same as market reception. And probably every indie developer watching this right now is nodding their head in unison. And a big example of this came last year with Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, a narrative-driven game about exploring the back roads of America, like very much like a folklore kind of aesthetic to it. Many indie developers, game journalists, critical people, they, threw heaps of praise on that game, and it sunk when it came to the market. It sunk so hard the developer did a post-mortem about on Medium, and just how shocked he was that the game didn't do well. And again, it's one of those very weird cases, because it could have certainly have gone the other way around. It could have become the next Gone Home, or Dear Esther, or even something like Her Story. But even with that said, you always have to have a little bit of a touch or a pulse on what's going on in the market. And we're not even discussing game genres or game conventions yet. We're even just talking about basic elements like UI design, quality of life features, accessibility. That basic level is very important, especially if you're going for a uniquely or explicitly driven game. If your game is already weird and confusing enough to understand, you don't want your control scheme to be frustrating to play or a UI that nobody can make sense out of. Again, the beauty about why we see many refined games do well is that there's very little learning curve to them. Either A, the genre is so well known and established everybody knows what to do, like a platformer or a battle royale, or developers took enough notes and did their research to understand all the little quality of life issues and accessibility and tried to streamline the hell out of it to get the most polished version of that as possible. Again, some big examples would be Nintendo, Blizzard. I'm sure you can spend the next few minutes thinking of more. But whatever the case may be, trying to get your game to be market friendly is a colossal task, and it's one that we'll probably have to come back to many times over in future videos. But with that said, we're going to switch to some game footage of the other well-known explicitly designed title, and I'm sure a few of you know what we're going to be talking about. But first, as always, a quick thank you to our Patreon backers. Thank you to our Patreon backers, and if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, check out our Discord channel, linked down below. I'm sure you all knew this was coming. This is, of course, Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy. And this was another game that is just explicitly designed. Now, whether it was explicitly designed to be good or bad, that's a discussion for another day. But this was a game that took over YouTube and Twitch for, I think, a better part of, what could we say, like 2 weeks, maybe a month? And this is a game that, again, everything that's been put into it is exactly what the developer wanted. But does that translate into success? And that is a very tough question to answer. Because again, most of you watching this right now have probably either played Getting Over It or have at least heard somebody mention it. And this is the other issue about this, and going back to Obra Dinn and Lucas Pope, that with his games, the fact that we talk about Lucas Pope after the success of Papers, Please warrants him a lot more freedom to design games like the Obra Dinn compared to other developers. I'm sure right now a few of you watching this have probably either developed or came up with your own crazy idea, something that in no way could be a mass marketed or a marketable game. But as we've said before, one of the more issues or harsh truths about game development, especially indie development, is that you really are only as good as your last big hit. And once you have that, that does give you clout. And clout is a major part of being a developer. And it's something that I think a lot of first-time and enthusiasts don't tend to either understand or think about. As we've said, with something like The Darkest Dungeon, that's another very weird case. Obviously, if you're watching this right now, you most likely have either heard of or played Darkest Dungeon. It was a celebrated indie success. Perfect Kickstarter, went through early access, the whole shebang. But the idea, like, if you never heard of Red Hook Games or The Darkest Dungeon, and somebody described that kind of game, a brutally difficult dungeon crawling RPG where your party can be wiped out and random events can kill you, how many people would have bought The Darkest Dungeon just on that description? I don't know the answer to that, and it's one thing that we will never know. Although, unless somebody decides to make like a clone or spiritual sequel, we'll see. But the point is that following the success of Darkest Dungeon, everybody knows who Red Hook Games are now. And with that cloud, gives them a lot of freedom. Again, Red Hook with Chris and Tyler, they could make a direct sequel to Darkest Dungeon, and you know every YouTuber, streamer, and game website is going to cover it. They could make, the Darkest Dungeon version of Getting Over It, and guess what? People would still cover that game and talk about it because of that clout. And even with Getting Over and the weirdness of it, because everybody was talking about it and Ben Foddy, again, that gives him more credence or more credibility when it comes to whatever he's going to work on next. He could make a traditional game as his next title. He could do something even crazier than this, which I can't imagine right now, especially with this footage on the screen. But again, the point is that it's very hard when you're trying to balance making the game you want versus making the game that's going to sell, especially with your position in the game industry. Again, with the people that we've talked about, that these titles, I don't think anybody thought they would be big successes. And again, games like Return of the Obra Dinn, Getting Over, and even something like Darkest Dungeon probably wouldn't have been picked up by a major publisher. Because who would take that risk on? And that is, of course, one of the main reasons why we have Kickstarter and the growth of crowdfunding as an alternative to funding a video game. And again, we get these surprise games sometimes. You do get your Papers, Please, your Obra Dinns. But you have no idea, or I don't think anybody has an idea when they're making a game, whether or not that's going to be a big success. And even with the games that do turn out that way, you can sometimes mitigate or hedge your bets based, again, on proper UI design, core fundamentals, and stuff like that. But it's not the same as being, or it's not really, I have no idea why I just fell down there as well. I'm watching my own footage as I'm talking. But it's not the same as you making the game that you want to make and basically damning everything else. So, to begin to wrap things up for this video, whenever you are designing a game, you have to think about how the game's going to do in the market. It is the big difference between what we could consider an enthusiast or a hobbyist in the game industry and somebody trying to make a living. And sometimes you do have to square that circle, in a manner of speaking. Developers such as Jake Brigette, Jeff Vogue, Cliff Harris, they have been in this industry now for more than 10 years. And when you get that long in the game industry, especially as independent developers, you do have to read the market. Whether it's by making a game that nobody has played before or something that they've been clamoring, or understanding what's popular in terms of accessibility, quality of life, and trying to make your game as easy to get into as possible. But even with all that said, that still doesn't guarantee success. So, to end things on for now, my question for the audience is this. Can you think of games that were amazing to play? These could be Game of the Year winners if they got more word out about them, but were horrible when it came to market appeal. Could be because of the genre that was picked, could be due to how the marketing promo was done, or anything else. Let me know in the comments below, and if you'd like me to tackle another topic here, feel free to leave a comment down below. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. Come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. I think this match will be more of an industry insight. We'll see how things go. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time. If you're looking for another book about game design, be sure to check out my first title, 20 Essential Games to Study, out now. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel linked down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.